In today's episode of the Psyche Project, we're exploring a question that hits close to home for many. Why do smart kids often grow up to feel lonely, stuck, or disconnected as adults? This recording includes subtitles so you can follow along. More intentionally, absorb the ideas and reflect at your own pace. So what's going on here? Why do so many intelligent, gifted children, kids who once amazed their teachers and parents, end up feeling like they're falling behind later in life? They were praised for being ahead of the curve, told they'd go far, labeled as gifted, talented, or the smart one, and yet somewhere along the way, that early promise turned into pressure. That praise became a prison, and now a lot of those same kids, the ones who stood out, are quietly struggling as adults. They can't find motivation. They feel socially behind. They struggle to start things, follow through, or connect deeply with others. And the worst part, they can't explain why, because on paper, everything still looks fine. They're still intelligent, still capable. But inside, there's this persistent feeling that life is happening around them, not with them, like they're spectators in a world they can't fully touch. And here's the truth. There's a reason for that. Many smart kids build their entire sense of identity around being smart. It becomes their defining trait, their anchor. But when that identity goes unexamined, it can turn into a trap. That thing that once made them feel special as children becomes the very thing that isolates them as adults. So let's talk about why that happens, and more importantly, how to undo it. Because this isn't about failure. It's about a survival strategy that outlived its usefulness. And if you can understand how you got here, you can begin to find a way out. When we're young, our identity is usually simple. Children naturally latch onto one or two traits and build a sense of self from there. It's often something basic. I like dinosaurs. I'm good at video games. I love chicken nuggets. These identities are one-dimensional, but that's normal. It's the beginning of understanding ourselves. But one of the most powerful labels a child can receive is this: you're smart. That phrase sticks. It gets repeated by teachers, parents, even other kids. And it becomes more than a compliment. It becomes a mirror. Something the child looks into every day to figure out who they are, and for a while it feels amazing. Being smart as a kid often means you get praised, rewarded, and put ahead of the pack. You might not have to try as hard as other students. You pick things up quickly. You get straight A's. Life feels like it's on easy mode. But here's the hidden cost. What most adults praise in a smart child isn't the effort, it's the ease. You get applause for solving problems quickly, for getting an A without trying, for understanding things instantly, and without realizing it, you start to believe something very dangerous. If I'm smart, things should be easy for me. That belief is quiet, subtle, but it lingers, and it begins to shape how you respond to difficulty. The belief that being smart means things should be easy creates a dangerous loop. When you're a child who never had to study and still got perfect grades, you unconsciously connect your self-worth to being naturally gifted. So when something finally gets hard, maybe in high school, college, or your first job, it doesn't feel like a normal challenge. It feels like an identity crisis. You're no longer the smart one. You're just someone who's struggling. And that hurts way more than it should, because your entire sense of value is tied to never needing to struggle. So what happens? You avoid things that might make you look or feel dumb. You procrastinate on tasks that require effort. You stay in your comfort zone because you're terrified of discovering that your intelligence has limits, and slowly, without even noticing, your growth stops. Not because you're lazy, not because you lack potential, but because you're trying to protect the only version of yourself you ever thought was lovable. This shows up emotionally too, not just academically. Many gifted children grow up in environments where their intelligence sets them apart. They might not relate to their peers. They're praised more by adults than by other kids. They often feel like outsiders, even if they're well-liked, and that sense of separation doesn't always go away. So they grow up constantly observing, analyzing, thinking, but not always connecting. They get used to living in their heads. They build rich inner worlds. They become masters of introspection, but when it comes to building relationships, expressing needs, or making mistakes in front of others, they freeze, they shut down, they pull away, because vulnerability feels like failure. And failure threatens the smart identity. So instead, they isolate, not because they don't want love or friendship, but because they don't know how to navigate it without feeling exposed. And now, as adults, they find themselves lonely. They crave connection, but they don't know how to trust it. They crave intimacy, but they're terrified of being fully seen. And the worst part, they often blame themselves for it. There's also a kind of grief that many gifted kids carry into adulthood, but don't have the language to express. It's the grief of being misunderstood, the grief of potential that felt promised, but never fully fulfilled, the grief of being praised for your mind, while your heart was quietly ignored. Because smart kids often learn to perform, to achieve, to impress. They learn how to get approval through accomplishments, but not how to feel safe just being themselves. So when they enter adulthood and those external gold stars disappear, they don't know what they're working toward anymore. Who are you if you're not impressing someone? Who are you if you're not the best in the room? The silence that follows can feel unbearable. Here's the truth. You're not broken. You're just unlearning a survival strategy that no longer fits the life you want to live. Being smart isn't the problem. Building your identity only around. Being smart is you were praised for being exceptional, but not for being human. Now your task is to reclaim the parts of you that were left behind, the part that tries even when it's hard, the part that asks for help, the part that risks failure, the part that embraces growth. That's not weakness. That's healing, and it's how you begin building a life that's not just impressive, but actually feels like it belongs to you. One of the most haunting feelings gifted adults carry is the guilt of wasted potential. It shows up in quiet ways. You look at your peers and wonder why they've surpassed you. You avoid reunions because you're not where everyone thought you'd be. You look at your own life and whisper, I was supposed to be more than this. This isn't just disappointment, it's shame, because somewhere along the way, being smart turned into a burden, not a gift. You were told you could be anything. But no one told you how to cope when you didn't become everything. You internalized that potential was a debt you had to pay back. So now, when life doesn't feel extraordinary, you feel like a failure, not just to yourself, but to everyone who believed in you, and that's a heavy weight to carry. To escape that guilt, many gifted adults fall into the productivity trap. They try to earn their worth through output, constantly starting new projects, working longer hours than needed, chasing new certifications, degrees, or accolades, never resting without guilt, because rest feels like laziness, stillness, feels like stagnation, and anything short of the best feels like not enough. But this hustle isn't motivated by passion, it's fueled by fear. Fear of being forgotten, fear of being ordinary, fear of never living up to what you were supposed to become. But here's the irony. The more you try to prove your worth through performance, the more disconnected you become from yourself. You lose the joy that once made you curious. You lose the creativity that once made you dream. You become a machine chasing productivity instead of a person chasing purpose. And no matter how much you accomplish, it never feels like enough. Because you're not chasing success, you're running from shame. To heal, you have to challenge the very identity you were praised for. That means letting go of some deep ingrained beliefs, that being smart makes you valuable, that ease equals intelligence, that struggle is weakness, that being ordinary is failure. These beliefs don't serve you anymore. They never really did. They were coping mechanisms, strategies you developed to survive a world that loved your achievements more than your authenticity. But now, you're allowed to rewrite the story. You're allowed to define success on your own terms. You're allowed to struggle without shame. You're allowed to be curious again, not because it leads to an outcome, but because it feels good to wonder. And most of all, you're allowed to rest. Not because you've earned it, but because you exist. Maybe being gifted isn't about being the best. Maybe it's about being deeply in tune with the world. Maybe your mind moves fast because it's wired to see connections others miss. Maybe your sensitivity is a strength, not a flaw. Maybe your existential questions are a sign of emotional depth, not dysfunction. You don't have to keep performing for love. You don't have to keep chasing potential to be worthy. You can be smart and scared, capable and confused, gifted and still learning. Real intelligence isn't measured by grades, degrees, or promotions. It's measured by how well you understand yourself, how bravely you face your inner world, and how kindly you hold space for your own imperfections. That's the kind of brilliance that never burns out, because it's not rooted in performance. It's rooted in presence. Beneath all of this, the guilt, the burnout, the identity confusion, is a child who once felt loved for being impressive, but not always for simply being. That child learned early that worth was transactional, that love came when they succeeded, that their value depended on praise, performance, and perfection. And now, as an adult, you might still be carrying that fear. If I stop achieving, will I stop mattering? But here's the truth. You were never loved because you were gifted. You were loved because you were you. The problem is, nobody ever taught you that being yourself was enough. So you tried to become what everyone else needed you to be. But healing means giving yourself what you didn't get. Unconditional acceptance, space to mess up, permission to explore without needing to prove anything. If you're no longer passionate about the path you once felt destined for, that's not failure. That's growth. Gifted adults often feel stuck in the identities they outgrew. The artist who stopped creating, the academic who burned out, the entrepreneur who doesn't want to hustle anymore. You don't owe your younger self a future that no longer fits. You don't have to keep proving that you were worth the label of gifted. You're allowed to evolve. You're allowed to be a beginner again, to learn slowly, to try things that have no measurable outcome. You're allowed to redefine success as peace, not productivity, joy, not achievement, alignment, not applause, because being gifted was never about meeting expectations. It was about seeing the world in a way others couldn't. And now, you get to decide what to do with that vision. The greatest tragedy of the gifted label is how often it drowns out your inner voice. You become so attuned to what others expect from you that you forget how to listen to what you want. You silence the part of you that's tired, that wants to rest, that craves something slower, softer, and more human. But what if your greatest potential isn't in what you produce, but in how fully you live? What if the most radical thing a gifted adult can do is stop trying to prove anything and simply be? Here's what they didn't tell you growing up. Your value was never about how smart you were. It was about how deeply you feel, how clearly you see, how bravely you love in a world that rewards distance. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not a disappointment. You are healing. And in that healing, you're reclaiming something far more powerful than potential. You're reclaiming yourself. So to every gifted adult who feels lost, burned out, or not enough, let this be your reminder. You were never meant to fit the mold. You were meant to break it, not by being extraordinary in the eyes of others, but by being fully, unapologetically you. That's your real gift, and it's more than enough. See you in the next video.